If a person didn't drink enough water, they might get kidney problems and headaches. Not enough exercise, they could get weak bones and fatigue. Not enough sunlight, depression and autoimmune disturbances. Not enough sleep, they could get brain fog and inflammatory issues. These people do not need drugs. They don't even need supplements. They just need water and exercise and sunlight and sleep. Well, there's another thing we all need that we're not getting, and that is electrons. We are all, because of the way we live, electron deficient. Electrons come from the sun, travel through space on the solar wind, and enter our Earth's atmosphere. From there, they travel down to the Earth via lightning strikes, and thus the Earth becomes a giant source of electrons for us. There are three ways we are designed to absorb electrons: through our skin, through our food, and through our air. Unfortunately, all three of these ways are no longer functioning for most of us due to our way of living. With the introduction of plastics and rubbers and synthetic materials, our feet are no longer in direct contact with the earth, except very rarely, say at the beach or maybe at a picnic. Instead of electrons going up through our bare feet, through our meridians and into our organs, they go backwards from our organs, through our skin, through our meridians, back into our environment. We're also meant to absorb electrons through our food. All cells, plant and animal, when they are intact, when the membranes are intact, that means that when the plant or animal food is fresh, each cell is like a little battery. It has a little electrical charge. Now, when we cook the food, plant and animal food, we have the advantage of destroying microorganisms, and we destroy the cell membranes, which makes it more absorbable. But the unintended consequence of this is that all the electrons evaporate out of the food. So it's not in our food either, with the exception of the little bit of raw food we eat, say in salads or fruit. Finally, there's the air. 100 years ago, the atmosphere was 20% more negative than positive in terms of ions. That's a fancy way of saying that the air had a surplus of electrons, a 20% surplus. 100 years later now, the atmosphere has a 20% deficit. That means that every time we take a breath, rather than absorbing electrons through our lungs, we're losing them through our lungs. This is why we are all electron deficient, because the three paths that should be feeding us electrons are now operating in reverse, and we are losing electrons through those same pathways. Scientists, doctors, and lay people alike are now realizing that we need to reconnect with the earth to receive the electrons that we need for our health. You may have heard of this. It's been called grounding or earthing, and it consists of running a wire from your bed or workplace to the grounding port on the outlet of your electrical outlet, which then goes, if your house is properly wired, to the ground. It goes outside to a stake in the earth. And I did this, and it was good, but it was kind of subtle, and I didn't think that I was getting the kind of results that I thought electrons could give me. I grew up in New York City, and I lived on the 8th floor. Now, for every foot you are removed from the earth, that is above the earth, there's a 100-volt drop in electrons. Now, one floor of an apartment is about 10 feet. So on the 8th floor, I was 80 feet times 100 volts per foot. I grew up at 8,000 volts positive. That meant that just sitting in my apartment, electrons were being pulled out of my body with a force of 8,000 volts. Now, when I walked across the carpet in my house growing up, if I touched a doorknob, I would get an electric shock. That's a minimum of 7,000 volts positive. So I grew up at about 15,000 volts positive. That's how many electrons were being pulled out of my body at all time. And I reasoned that if I grew up at 15,000 volts positive, I might need 15,000 volts negative to heal myself. And that the neutral, the zero of grounding or earthing, while certainly better than a positive charge, a lack of electrons, might not have enough power to clear the damage that that kind of lifestyle had created. And I was right. To explain this, let me tell you how a car battery works. Car batteries are made of plates of lead with sulfuric acid and water in between. And they are always in a process of forming lead sulfate crystals. But as long as the battery is fully charged, then the crystals don't really accumulate too badly. There are two things that cause the accumulation of the lead sulfate crystals. One is dehydration. The battery will lose water as part of its operation in most cases. And if you don't replace it, the solution becomes too concentrated and lead sulfate crystals can form. The other is if the battery isn't charged properly. The battery should never go too low and should always be charged back up to full capacity. When they're not, the crystals accumulate, and over time, the battery can no longer receive a full charge. It just won't have the energy it used to, and the crystals will get larger and larger until eventually the battery is useless. Now, the same thing happens in a human body. If we become dehydrated, or we don't have the proper charge, in this case, a source of electrons, then we also accumulate crystals. And our batteries cannot take a charge properly. Some people would know this as phase angle. Most people would only experience it as fatigue. The same way that you can recover a car battery, you can recover a human battery. So, the car battery can have two types of crystals, soft and hard. Soft crystals only require that the battery be completely charged, even a little more than it would normally go to once in a while. It would be overcharged, and this helps decrystallize it and keep it healthy. Hard crystals that have been around for a while need something else. They need voltage spikes to break loose the crystalline structure. It's the same thing we can do with the human body. If you supply electrons to the human body, that's like charging the body up. And if all you do is ground yourself, you're giving it electrons, but not enough to repair the crystallization of the human battery. You would need to give it extra voltage. So, in the same way that I grew up at 15,000 volts positive, I knew I was going to need to go to at least 15,000 volts negative to repair the damage I had done. The second issue is, if you've crystallized yourself rather thoroughly for various reasons, and we get into biologic crystallization in our other video, then you might need some voltage spikes to go in there and completely break up the really hard crystallizations. And I'll explain how this works. There's something called a piezoelectric effect. It's how quartz watches work. It's how the long lighters for your barbecue work. Basically, if you stress a crystal, electrons will come out. But in physics, many reactions are reversible, and this is no exception. So if you put electrons back into a crystal, it causes stresses in the crystal. Now, crystals very rarely form perfectly. In fact, scientists spend a lot of time trying to grow perfect crystals for things like lasers and industry. Usually, left to their own devices, crystals will have millions of imperfections, inclusions, all sorts of places where they are weak. And if you stress the crystal, it will fracture along those lines. So by creating voltage spikes or spikes of electrons into the body, the crystals can be stressed and fracture along those lines. So with this in mind, I built a machine. And I wanted the machine to give me electrons in all the ways that I should be getting them, through my skin, through my food, through the air. But I also wanted it to be able to decrystallize my human battery. So I made a prototype, and I put it on my feet. Now, when I was in my 20s and naive, I thought it would be great to eat only fruit because nothing dies that way. The tree or bush willingly gives its fruit. And I did that for almost a year and ended up giving myself peripheral neuropathy and peripheral artery disease. So I've had to wear socks 24/7, thick, heavy wool socks, to bed during the day, in the middle of summer, all the time, for 15 years. And my feet were numb and uncomfortable. And I thought, okay, that's just the price I paid for the damage I did for my well-meaning youthful experiment. I had the machine generating electrons on my feet, and within a few days, I noticed I didn't feel the need for socks. And I took them off. I went to bed that night thinking, I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night with cold feet. Okay, but I didn't. And I have not worn socks or needed to wear socks since, except for putting on a pair of shoes. The first thing I noticed then was that my circulation improved in my feet dramatically. Then the numbness and tingling started to go away. Within about 2 weeks, all that was left was just 2 numb spots on the ends of each big toe. And a week or 2 after that, even they were gone. When I was able to clear something in myself that I had had for 15 years, in a matter of days and weeks, I knew I was onto something. Okay, how about eating electrons? Could that be done? If you've ever heard of liposomes, that's what I was thinking. Liposomes are little spheres of lecithin into which you can place some compound to deliver to the body. And I thought, could I make an electric liposome? So I electrified the blades of my Vitamix blender, put some water and lecithin in, and blended it up. And lo and behold, I made electric liposomes. And drinking that was a remarkable experience. I just had to sit down for a good 20 minutes and just be peaceful. My whole body was just so thrilled to have it come inside like that. Then finally, what about breathing? So I electrified a reaction chamber inside of a plastic pipe and breathed air through it, and ended up breathing in electrons, which had yet another amazing effect. What was left was to figure out how to decrystallize the battery of the human body. Now, just having the device on my feet and getting electrons in that way did wonders. But one day, one of the prototype devices malfunctioned. It had been running for 6 hours, was getting hot, and it went into an auto protect mode and started pulsing off and on. And as a result, that next day, I released an enormous amount of crystal debris into my urine. And what I realized I had inadvertently done was to recreate exactly the kind of technology that's used to recover very damaged car batteries that have gotten lead sulfate crystals. So now it was simply a matter of figuring out how to make the machine do that on purpose. Now, there are other ways to get crystals out of the body. Take kidney stones, for example. Modern medicine has the ability to use focused sound waves to shatter kidney stones. It's much better than the way they used to be done, which was surgically in many cases when they were bad. But using that technology is perhaps a bit overkill, because we're not just vibrating the kidney stones in that case. All the other tissue is being vibrated. It's a little traumatic. And it only gets the part of the body where the sound waves are focused. But when you use electrons to work on crystals in the body, it only goes after the crystals, and it gets them everywhere. When you are able to start breaking crystals down in the tissue, let's say it's in the kidneys, well, they can be urinated out if they're small enough. But there are also crystals all throughout the tissue, in the lungs, the brain, the bone marrow, the arterial wall, the skin. When you can start to pulverize these crystals, what it does is massively increase the surface area of the crystal. And then if you take things that are specifically decrystallizing, like citric acid, magnesium sulfate, phosphocitrate, then these things have an exponentially larger amount of surface area to work with. So while there are many great decrystallizing protocols, they will be millions of times more effective if you increase the surface area of the crystals you're working with. What else can electrons do for us? Well, let's talk about antioxidants. Antioxidants typically bring an electron to a free radical, neutralizing the dangerous free radical, but then becoming a lesser free radical in exchange, in its turn. The way it's supposed to work is that the antioxidants are then recharged, sometimes by NADPH, but recharged with another electron to go back and do it again, over and over, millions, billions of times a second, quenching free radicals. Now, if someone has a lot of free radical disease, until now we've thought, just give them more antioxidants. But if the antioxidants don't have electrons to recycle them, to recharge them, it's sort of like loading up a bunch of delivery trucks with food to get into a town that's very hungry, but then never refilling the trucks. The trucks can make one trip, and that's it. They just sit there. Far better for that hungry city to have a normal amount of trucks, but keep restocking the trucks over and over and let them do their delivery runs, than to keep putting in more trucks that only ever get to make one run. That's exactly what's going on with antioxidants. I would much rather have the amount of antioxidants I get in my normal diet and make endogenously, and all the electrons I need to keep them running, than lots of antioxidants in a pill, but not enough electrons for them to work with. Let's talk about circulation. Arteries and veins only represent 15% of our circulation. Capillaries represent the lion's share at 85%. Now, capillaries are so tiny that red blood cells often have to fold in half to get through them. The red blood cells and the blood vessel walls, including the capillaries, are supposed to each have a negative charge. That means they're both supposed to have plenty of electrons. And when that's the case, they repel each other, meaning they slip through. It's like a magnetic levitation train. It goes through without any resistance. But when there's not enough electrons, things can start sticking together. Consider what happens when you rub a balloon on a piece of wool. It will stick to a wall. Why? Because the wall and the balloon are arguing over who gets to keep the electrons that are there. All glue, all adhesion, all crystallization is lack of electrons. Now, that electrostatic force that holds the balloon to the wall becomes exponentially more powerful at smaller orders of magnitude. So by the time you get to the microscopic level with a cell through a capillary, electrostatic forces are incredibly powerful. And if you ever look at a red blood cell in a capillary under a microscope, you can often see it just sitting there, oscillating, unable to move for minutes at a time. Another issue is that we now know that the same crystals that form kidney stones, calcium oxalate, can form inside the arterial wall and be part of the plaque that is causing the arteries to constrict. So, decrystallizing the body with electrons is an important part of our circulation. I think that's why my feet got warm so very quickly after 15 years of being cold. I had finally decrystallized my feet, put the electrons back in, and the circulation was right back there again. Well, let's talk about infections. 95+% of infections are opportunistic. They don't bother us if we're healthy. They are composters. The biofilms they secrete are the same things we see on the compost piles. So, if we're healthy, these things don't see us as compostable material. They stay dormant or they pass through our body. How do they know if we are healthy or not? What makes a composting microorganism wake up and turn on? Well, the hallmark difference between a living cell and a dead cell is the membrane. In a living cell, the membrane is intact, and in a dead cell, it's broken down. Well, an intact membrane has an electrical charge, and a broken membrane does not. So I believe what happens with these opportunistic composting infective organisms is that they are tasting, sensing our electrical charge. And when the charge is high, they think, this is living tissue, nothing for me here. But when the charge gets to a certain point, they think, oh, this is dead matter. Okay, it must be lunchtime. So is it possible that by raising our electrical charge, we can convince all of these infections to simply go to sleep? Another thing that's interesting is the effect of electrons on cells in terms of their growth. We know that if you take a cancer cell that has low voltage and raise its voltage up, it will stop dividing. On the other hand, if you take a normal cell and lower its voltage to the cancer range, it will become cancerous. So it's possible that electrons play a pivotal role in our body's defense against cancer. Finally, I'd like to talk about worms and parasites. I invite you to go onto YouTube and type in the words worms and electricity. And what you'll find are people who like to go fishing and want fresh worms and don't want to buy them. So they take a car battery and put probes into the soil from the positive and negative. And you'll see videos of worms popping their heads up out of the soil. They don't want to be there. Worms hate electricity. Now, if you start running electrons into your body, you may notice things coming out of you. Now, most worms are microscopic. You won't see them other than sheets of mucus. But sometimes you'll actually see living worms coming out of the body. It's actually better that they come out alive. Were we to kill the worms, the flukes, all of these things in the body, then the body would have billions of carcasses of worms in the liver and in the tissue to encapsulate, to digest, to dissolve. Much better that they decide to leave of their own volition. Just be prepared for things coming out that are still quite alive. If someone is thirsty or not exercising or not getting enough sun or not getting good sleep, there's no supplement, there's no drug. They need water, exercise, sunlight, and a good night's sleep. These things have to happen or they'll be chasing symptoms their whole life. It's the same with electrons. We need electrons to stay healthy. If you're interested in what our electron charging device can do for you, give us a call.